Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, not to be confused with the artificial one, coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon with the Secret of Light group, which was inspired by Walter Russell's book, The Secret of Light, where we look at the wave and all things associated with the wave, the cubosphere, and how matter is manifested in our 3D world. Today, we are going to continue in in Rule 8 of Alice Bailey's work. This is the third part of this. We've begun to look at this, and at this point, this is what Alice calls the midway point. There are 15 rules of white magic. White magic is soul magic, which is divine magic brought in through the soul self. In contrast to what she would call black magic or dark magic, which is just brought in through the personality or the avatar that is speaking to you right now. So as we begin to understand this idea of soul magic as taking our lower chakras and elevating them into a higher, reversing polarities and so on, which are covered in some of the previous videos, we are today going to cover this last part of Rule 8. We're still going to talk about this midway point where the water and land meet, but we're also going to talk about some of the other aspects of the elements that all constitute our current existence and consciousness that we deal with today. We're going to look at, as I said here, I do a collage, as everyone's probably pretty aware by now, just to give visual representation of some of the concepts that we're going to speak about, because I think it really helps root that in our consciousness of kind of where we're going and to give us a little bit of a background into what Bailey may be saying. So I'm going to read Rule 8 again. This will be the third time I read it. I hope you don't get bored, but that's what I do. So Rule 8 is the Agnosurians respond to the sound. Okay, the sound. The waters ebb and flow. Let the magician, which is us, guard himself from drowning at the point where land and water meet. The midway spot, which is neither dry nor wet, must provide the standing place where his feet are set. When water, land, and air meet, there is a place for magic to be wrought. And again, when we speak of magic, we're not talking about sorcery or, things of that sort. What we're actually talking about is manifestation of divine consciousness in the 3D and working with the knowing of the divine to bring that forth into our current reality and our current consciousness. And so as we talk a little bit about that, we actually see here, which we're going to call the divine mind, which is the one, which is the idea that all things, the universe is a mind universe. It's an intelligence. It's the Akashic intelligence, as I say, the original AI. And that permeates all things, that permeates our world. But us as individuals have come from a conscious cosmic realm and have decided to manifest in this 3D realm. And so therefore we created a body that brought together all these elements that the Buddhists call the body, which is the energy body, which is the sheathed in the energy of food and so on, because those are the elements that make up our physical corporeal existence. And that's our body here with our chakra, which is our points of entry, our points of communication. And so this is a picture of our bodies, kind of our body with its energy signature on the outside and also with the chakras. But this body is a sensing body. We have nerves, we have all kinds of apparatus, we have ears, we have eyes, we have noses that take in all these different sensations that we then transmute or bring in to form new realities or new existence that we can then experience in this 3D world. But within this sensory perception that we have, there are four main elements that we actually deal with within the sensory perception. And within the tarot, which is an ancient form of astrology, or what you might want to call, looking into the energy resonances, we have the suit of cups, which is water. We have the suit of earth, which is the pentacles. We have the suit of air, which is the swords. and we have the suit of fire, which is the wands. So within tarot, we actually express these four elements within these suits. Now, each of these suits are suits that we wear, right? They're all suits that make up our existence. And so right now we're talking about we're land. So this is a painting of the land spirits, kind of the idea that the land is the manifestation here on earth, and the water, which is the consciousness. But where these two meet is where we're standing right now. So we're standing right between these two right now in this rule 8. But we're also, as we stand in this rule, we're surrounded by this, which is the spirit of the air. So we have the air around our bodies. We're standing between these two, but as we stand here, we bring forth within our headspace the divine fire of man, the divine fire of God, which is in our head. So we carry this in our bodies. We stand between these two, and we are surrounded by the air. So these are the concepts that we're going to talk about today in this Rule 8, this last part. And we're going to discuss of maybe some of the pitfalls of drowning in the water, of being consumed by the fire, of becoming too salt in the earth, and being drowned by the water. So these are what we're going to talk about today. Any questions before I move forward in any of the diagrams I've shown or pictures I've shown? All right, let's get started.
I have a ton to add, but no questions.
Okay, well, okay. Well, maybe you can add it as we talk. Okay, you want to do that? Okay, so the cycle of ebb and flow. Again, this is the cosmic pulse we've talked about. This is the cycles that we go through, this ebb and this flow of feminine and male energy, of positive and negative, if you want to call it that, dark and light. All things have this ebb and flow. We never just have one flow in one direction. It's an ebb and a flow, an ebb and a flow. And again, these are Alice Bailey's words. So later, when the words of the great Christian teacher have significance, he will be able to say, whether in the body or out of the body is a matter of no moment. The act of service to be rendered will determine the point where the self is concentrated. But it will be the same self, whether freed temporarily from the form consciousness or immersed in the form, in order to function in different aspects of the divine whole. The spiritual man seeks for the furthering of the plan and to identify himself with the divine mind in nature. You remember back to the collage, the divine mind we were talking about, in nature. Withdrawing to the midway spot, he endeavors to realize his divinity, and then, having done so, he focuses himself in his mental form, which puts him in rapport with the universal mind. He endures limitations so that thereby he may know and serve. He seeks to reach the hearts of men, and to carry them inspiration from the depths of the heart of spiritual being. Again, he asserts the fact of his divinity, and then, through a temporary identification with his body of sensory perception, remember the picture of the sensory perception, our nerves, everything that we have, ears, nose, eyes, all those things, of feeling and of emotion, he finds himself at one with the sensitive apparatus of divine manifestation, which carries the love of God to all forms of the physical plane. So as we're talking here, we've decided to incarnate, right? We've decided to have a body. We've decided to do this, to play this game, whether it be a simulation or a realization that we're carrying out as a simulation. But we're here. We've decided to do that. We've brought this in, this form in, and we are now as almost a divine probe for God. We have all these sensory perceptions. We are communicating back to the divine one with this divine body that we've created. And the idea is, what's the purpose? Is it to make money? Is it to cause war? Is it to control others? Or is it to be the manifestation which carries the love of God to all forms in the physical plane? Again, he seeks to aid in materializing of the divine plan on the physical plane. He knows that all forms are the product of energy rightly used and directed. With full knowledge of his designed sonship or daughtership, but as again, I don't want to be gender specific here, but this is how Bailey writes, and a potent mind realization of that term conveys, he focuses his forces in the vital body and becomes a focal point for the transmission of divine energy, and hence a builder in union with the building energies of the cosmos. So this is back to where we're all one, that we have these energies coming in from the cosmos, that we're being affected by many aspects of energies in our realm, that we're just not a body that's an animal that is only affected by our food and the things that we sense, but by these cosmic energies of the cosmos. He carries the energy of illumined thought and sanctified desire down into the body of ether, and so works with intelligent devotion. You ask for a clear definition of the midway spot. For the probationer, it is the emotional plane. So we're saying, what is the midway spot? She's saying it is the emotional plane. The Kura Shishitra of the plane of illusion, where land, physical nature, and water, emotional nature meet. So this plane of illusion, that some people call it Maya. This is one of the concepts that Walter Russell brought forth, that he really only had two concepts that he really wanted to convey. The first was that there is a divine purpose and there is a divine knowledge. And two, that everything we experience is an illusion, is an illusionary. It is a cinematographic projection on a cosmic screen. Those were his two main points that he wanted to bring forth, and he states that in his home study course. So for the disciple, which is us, it is the mental plane where from form and soul make contact, and the great transition becomes possible. For the advanced disciple and the initiate, the midway spot is the causal body, the Karana Sariya, the spiritual body of the soul, standing as the intermediary between spirit and matter, life and form, the monad and the personality. These also can be discussed and understood in terms of the centers. So comments or questions on this that we've just read?
I am all over this one. To really get where we're coming in with centers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And midway,
Mm-hmm.
and what the heart really is,
mm-hmm.
is that this is fire. One of the, it's the, which one was it? The staff,
mm-hmm.
or the wands,
mm-hmm.
right?
Wands.
Which is what the Pope has,
mm-hmm.
with the pine cone on the
mm-hmm.
top of it that represents our pineal gland.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really what the center is of everything, right? It's just a point of perception. But the centers of these lines of fire define air within fire.
Mm-hmm.
So air is implied by fire through the centers of the lines. And then to get, and this is hard because it's a toy, but this is essentially an icosahedron.
Mm-hmm.
It's a stellated icosahedron. If I connect all these points, right, which is just a tetrahedron on top of each face of water,
mm-hmm.
right,
mm-hmm.
which is the cup. But each one of these tetrahedrons on top of it, if I connect them all, this is a dodecahedron.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is that each one of these points, right, if I position it right, it's the center of that face. Mm-hmm. And so the centers mm-hmm. of the faces of water imply ether, mm-hmm. right? So, but it again, it's defined by the center of that face of the geometry. And to understand what that really is that geometry is a frequency, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. To really get what this is all talking about is so profoundly beautiful and simple. How and what those forms are in terms of how they're entangled with each other, how the masculine and feminine are entangled with each other, mm-hmm. is through pi and phi, mm-hmm. right? To really get what those, and those are universal constants, right? Those are true law. And so when you're talking about the water meeting the shore, meeting the land, and this is the land and the water, those are law, right? The law of the water, the law of the land, and then the law of the air is which is above them all.
Exactly.
And again, that's what's inside of this form, is the air is the octahedron. It is that solid, right? That I want to emphasize that all of this stuff is what it's talking about is this. It's using all these words and it expresses as an infinity and eternal essence of what can be created through this, but it all has to be created through this. And this is what I want, whatever we're going into, what I'm here to bring is just those very, and I don't know it all, right? I just know these very core principles that this is called a tetracad, right? This is something that's in Vedic, and again, this is Vedic science. This is why I'm so interested in Alpha Vedic. Is they need to have this stuff too, because they're not really, it's not Vedic if it's Walter Russell's work, because it's really has a deeper meaning to it. And I've only got a piece of it. You've got a piece of it. You're doing a beautiful job here because you're doing this in a synergistic fashion, right? And that's what's so important is what I'm here for, is it's a synergistic, symbiotic, natural process that we're all coming together to bring together the meaning, because the meaning is the middle, is the center, right? But it's infinite. So the only limitation is our imagination, but we have to agree on it, right? And if we're not starting from pure first principles, a solid foundation, which is what the cornerstone of the Freemasons is really talking about, we're building castles in the sky, right? And this is really why I get nervous when I do this, because I'm so energized, because this is so profoundly beautiful that that this stuff that we start from the rock solid foundation of simplicity and beauty, right? And then there's no limit to what we can do. It's just a matter of coming in non-judgment, right? Sovereign, right action, no harm, coming together, and love is the key, because that's everything that I'm talking about is the physics of love. It is what sympathetic resonance is the physics of love, is music, is what ebony and ivory living in perfect harmony is really talking about. And that is all that the 7 rays between the black and the white. And that's what 9 is. 9 is just all of those different colors. And it's the feminine, and that's really what's coming back, is the divine intelligence is supplanting the artificial intelligence. So technology has to go away, and everything we're doing with biogeometry, it really is the DNA, because it is the antenna, and the water in the DNA is that interface with everything, right? But when we correct the DNA is when we turn on all the technology that's inside of us already. We don't need all this other shit. Right? It's already in us, but we need to start with these first principles of where does it all start? What is the numbers, and how does the numbers affect the amino acids and the ATP and the DNA is the key. Is these are codes. DNA has a code to it. And anyways.
Yeah. Well, and as we
I need to start my own thing, I think, because I don't want to be detrimental, because I really do appreciate what you're doing, and I don't want to. Well, this is important because, again, it's foundational.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you're here, because this is a different aspect. And as we talked earlier, is that my quandary with biogeometry is that we're not really talking at the base level like you're talking about these, and about the geometry with the bio, and with the Vedic principles, as you talked about, because Bailey's work is all based on Vedic, right? It's from Theosophy, it's from the Eastern side much more than the Western side. And then as we get into some of these other concepts, some of the ideas are much more chemistry than alchemy, right? When the chemistry, we're dealing with dead elements, we're dealing with, the separation of things, where alchemy, we're coming in and bringing the separation, but we bring them back together to form divine bodies. And so all these concepts that we have are very instrumental. And I think what you bring forth is, is astounding, right? And so the ideas that the centers that we're talking about, all these concepts and ideas bring a depth to Bailey's work that I think a lot of people miss, and they just see it as being a Luciferic thing and not really bringing in the ideas of the land and the water, and bringing back not just Luciferianism, which is, as you said, building castles in the sky, which is what Steiner warned against as the trap of the mystic, is that we get so rooted in this higher vibrational concepts that they become so outlandish that we don't actually root them back in a physical nature, which is form, angle, and so on, and the elements. So thank you so much. Anybody else before we move on to the next slide?
Why are the centers different for different levels of consciousness? You know, when he says, okay, I'm reading. Mm-hmm. So it's different for the probationer. It's one, you know, it's different from, the center is different from the center for the disciple. Why shouldn't it be the same for everybody?
Well, because
I think what that is more, they have the same center, it's different levels, mm-hmm. right? Is because this is what the silver cord really speaks to, is that there's only one center and everything is connected through that silver cord. So we all share one center. Mm-hmm. And that's a key part, but we all have a different connection to that one center. That's our uniqueness, right? Is that okay. Center is still the heart, because there's only one heart, right? And we're all part of that, but it's just, and again, this gets what string theory comes in, to really get what string theory is talking about. Again, it's a bastardization of these divine principles. And why the Vedanta is so important is that is the divine feminine intelligence that needs to be restored. And this is why the indigenous people, that is their intelligence, that is what Anastasia's work is really all about. It's part of that divine feminine intelligence, right? Is that, mm-hmm. and that's the whole thing with East and West, and the West is death, right? Because mm-hmm. that's what the night is the mm-hmm. dark period is the death. It's the mm-hmm. death of the day. We're in the life of the day right now. We're in that part of the dawn of a new rising. But this is what all of these cycles are. And to really get the fractal nature of it all is everything has to follow these four causal forces. Every second has a spring, summer, winter, and fall, right? Again, that's not what they are. They're processes of birth, growth, decay, and death as a fundamental. But these are the four causal forces that all of this churning has to happen, and why love is in evolve backwards. Mm-hmm. Right, is to really get, there are no coincidences. And all the secrets are right in front of us. We just have to let go of all of our beliefs. And this is what I did a long time ago, and why I've been able to even come up with all this craziness, right, is I don't follow the cult anymore. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm kind of just flowing with the information, and everything I'm saying is I reserve the right to change my mind, because I don't really know. I just know these core principles. They're irrefutable. This is what law really is, right? Because I can show you, this is law, mm-hmm. right? It didn't get legislated, it just is. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't need to be enforced. I don't need to prove this to you. Mm-hmm. You need to prove it to yourself, right? That's what the great work is. Mm-hmm. Prove it to yourself, then you've done the great work. But mm-hmm. I'm not here to prove anything, right? But I'm saying this is beautiful, and I want to share it. Mm-hmm. But I'm not here to share it with anybody either. I believe very firmly in not the pearls in the swine. Mm-hmm. And that took a long time to really understand what that meant, right? Mm-hmm. Some people don't want to know it. And that's just sad. Mm-hmm.
And that's, as you said, with the idea of the Western, you know, what is Western medicine, right? It's pharmacology and so on, versus Eastern medicine. And the ideas that, and that's why when next week, we're going to talk a little bit on Robert Bartlett's work of real alchemy, and really get into the differences between alchemy and chemistry, and that one is the study of life, and one is really the study of death and dead things. And so as we begin to expand on this channel, get deep, you know, finish up this middle point, we're going to actually begin to explore a little bit more of alchemy next week, and then we're actually going to begin to set some foundations for biogeometry as a science of biology and geometry, and how those correspond and relate to each other. All right, any more questions or comments before we move on?
I'd like to just make an observation that in my history, education, and everything, I was really good at chemistry. Mm-hmm. and I have a big stretch making the change or the transformation or observations from the perspectives that I was brought up into this better place.
And again, that's just as we talked about, was the indoctrination, the training, you know, all the baggage that's given to us that we have to overcome. And you know, the longer we've been doing it, the more difficult it seems to be.
Yeah, I got straight A's in that shit. So it's really
I'd love to speak to that. I'd really love to speak to that in terms of the biogeometry and the nature and existential terms of what experience is it's because you've accepted all of those half-truths as truths, but these are all geometric. And so the whole nature of what experience is it's a crystallization process, and that's all about adding symmetry, because that's what the midway really represents. Is one half is symmetry, it's perfect symmetry. And so the masculine essence is distortion, right? That's the death part. But everything, this experience, so you have to work through all of those beliefs, because this is again what 9/11 did for me, is it just crushed everything. But you have to work through transmuting those, because that's the alchemical process, but it's a geometric. I just want to emphasize that part, is that you can't accept these concepts, right? Because it's a geometry that is not congruent with what's already within you, with your geometry. And that goes right back to Gisli again about your frequencies and what you're subjecting them to. It matters that two-way. So that's really, you know, because that's a big part of what I'm here. It's also this existentialism in terms of what the geometry really is all taught. It's all about sacred geometry. It's all about symmetry, right? It's all about that's what evolution is because divinity is perfect symmetry, and that there is none of that ever here. You can't have that here because that's God, right? And that is, never.
That's it. Okay, we're gonna move.
That's it right there. You know, the life and form, the monad and the personality. The monad is God. Yeah, it's just a circle. That's how simple everything is.
And the personality is us, the avatar here on the earth.
Yeah, that's the nineness, right? The nineness is what theosophy is really all about, and what the Enneagram is really all about is the 9 personality types. And what Mercury is really all about is it's an identity, right? This is what messenger to the God, first planet from the suns, and that's a matrix in matrix algebra. Okay, what an identity complex is, it's a matrix, because this is a matrix, and that's what the cube really is. Those faces of the cube are matrices. They got numbers in them. And this is what my model is. And again, I haven't shown it to anybody. To really know what numbers are and how they relate to each other is what the matrix, and I'm telling you, this is quantum qubit theory too. This is something that isn't, but they don't call it, they don't honor the Vedanta in what it really is. They're calling it all these other names and saying they discovered it. And I'm saying, no, these are very core, beautiful principles that you're distorting with your mathemagics. You know, that, but the circle is everywhere.
So, as every student knows, there are 2 centers in the head. One center is between the eyebrows, third eye, and has the pituitary body as its objective manifestation. The other region at the top of the head, the crown, and has the pineal gland at its concrete aspect. The pure mystic, again, this is the pure mystic, has his consciousness centered in the top of the head. So if we are a pure mystic, we only are working out of the crown chakra, right? We're only working with this divine concept. This is, again, the trap that Steiner talked about with the pure mystic. And almost entirely in the etheric body. The advanced worldly man is centered in the pituitary region. So we have a spiritual man who is concentrated in the pituitary region. We have the mystic who is concentrated only in the crown. When through occult unfoldment and esoteric knowledge, the relationship between the personality and the soul is established, there is a midway spot in the center of the head in the magnetic field, which is called the light of the head. So go back to that, you know, on the collage where you saw kind of the guy's head on fire, right? The light in the head. And it is here that the aspirant takes his stand. This is a spot of vital import. It is neither land or physical, nor water or emotional. It might be regarded as the vital or etheric body, which has become the field of conscious service, of directed control, and of force utilization towards specific ends. Here, the magician, which is us, takes his stand, right? This is where we go from aspirant to magician. The medium of his force of energy body performs the magical creative work. One point is rather obtrusively dealt with in this rule, but it clarifies. If the words are studied with care, at the close of the rule, we are told that when water, land, and air meet, again, remember those three aspects we showed in the collage, there is the place for the working of magic. Curiously, in these phases, the idea of location is omitted and only the time equation is considered. Any comments on that, Cosmic, on the time equation?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that these are states of matter, right? Solid, liquid, gas, and that there's in thermodynamics, that triple point where all of those phases are the same. That's important. That's important, and that's all.
Okay. Air is a symbol of the Buddhic vehicle. Now, if you remember the Buddhic vehicle, the Buddhic plane was the Christ consciousness, was those areas where the ascended masters were in. This is the Buddhic plane. So air is the symbol of the Buddhic vehicle, of the plane of spiritual love. And when the three above enumerated in their energy aspects meet, it is the indicative of a focusing in the soul consciousness and a centralization of the man in the spiritual body. From that point of power, outside of form, from the central sphere of unification, and from the focus point within that circle of consciousness, the spiritual man projects his consciousness into the midway spot within the brain cavity where the magical work must, in relation to the physical plane, be carried out. So we're taking these forces, we're centering them in the brain within our cavities, and then carrying out this work in the physical plane. This ability to project the consciousness from the plane of soul realization into that of creative magical work on the etheric subplanes is gradually made possible as the student in his meditation work develops facility in focusing his attention in one way or other of the centers in the body. This is accomplished through the medium of the four centers in the etheric body. He gradually gains that plasticity and that fluidity of the self-directed consciousness, which will enable him to play on the centers as a musician utilizes the 7 notes of music. When this has been achieved, he can begin to train himself in wider and more extended focusing and must learn to withdraw his consciousness not only to the brain, but to the soul on its own plane, and thence redirect his energies in the performance of the magical work of the soul. The fundamental secret of the cycles lies in this withdrawal and subsequent refocusing of attention, and it must be remembered in this connection that the basic law underlying all work is that energy follows thought. If aspirants would remember this, they would live through their periods of aridity with greater ease and would be conscious of the underlying purposes. So as we begin to talk a bit about this, as we begin to talk about how we begin to manifest in the 3D reality through our soul, using our form, using our body, using what we have manifested on this 3D plane, the sheath of food that we've brought in that has the ability to transmute and transform. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier with Cosmic was talking about the need that we currently have in dead technology, which we would call this technology of Western technology, which is really most of it started here in the West, this technology we talk about, this dead technology. That as we begin to grasp these concepts, a new technology will be brought forth. And that will be a technology of consciousness and of the vehicle of the body beginning to manifest and transmute and transform the 3D reality. So we're looking at beginning to build a live technology of the East and of the feminine energy, as in contrast to the dead technology of the West, which is the male technology, which is not a technology of life, but deals with dead aspects and causes death, as we've seen. You know, it could be said that it causes death, right? We look at the waveforms and things that we see and how they have this detrimental aspect on the bio. Any comments on what I just said or questions?
Well, when I look at this whole paragraph, the last part, yeah, like being able to center our attention in the head, and getting there and working on that every time we have a chance. It's like it says, it takes a long time because the periods of aridity, like we think we're not doing much, but just by being able to focus in our head, this point will grow and this light will grow. And, I think we'll be able to, create better technology or things that will work better with the human body and the planet for sure. But there's a lot to ponder in here,
Anybody else before I move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to share something going through my head. When I went through I would call it my initiation for life experience before I left my my former institution, I really felt that without knowing without thinking or without having this knowledge of what we are studying now, just by being, I was able to manifest things. I'm just looking back, and when I look back, it's kind of extraordinary. But now that I'm more conscious about what we are studying, I feel that my power is not there. It's like, I don't know how to say this. It's like, I've embodied this knowledge coming from inside without thinking, just like being and following, I think, the little voice in my head. And I manifest it like crazy. And now that I'm studying, I feel that, I should be in a better place, but I'm not sure about that. I know that actually something is happening. I know that I'm transforming. I know that I'm purifying, because that happened like for 5 years before I left IFC. So things were happening, but I was not aware of it. So even now that I'm consciously investing efforts and time to kind of understand and to transform and to be, I have the impression that it's not much is happening, but I know that it's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to share that because it's kind of...
Well, and I was going to ask that question of, has anyone really been seeing progress, or has anyone actually been practicing what we've been talking about? And I have been actually trying to work with this kind of fire in the head, bringing, concentrating on the pineal and then the crown and trying to get to that center spot. And what I see is, I don't know if I'm manifesting or I'm just getting out of the way, and the divine is working, to my advantage in a sense, or to my desire. Because oftentimes I want to get in the middle and make things happen, as they say, during these arid periods. I'm an Aries, right? I'm a Capricorn rising. I got so much fire going on. I just want to go, right? And for me, I'm lucky I have a Pisces moon, right? Because that will get me back kind of a little bit in that water element, kind of more centered, a little bit more mystical. So for me, sometimes it may be that I just need to get out of my own way and begin to let the universe work in my favor rather than trying to force the outcome. Any more comments before we move on to the next slide? All right, here we go. It might here be asked, what are the dangers of the midway spot? And this is a topic we discussed prior to this discussion about, even work with frequencies. What are the dangers we have when we work with energies or as we actually begin on these journeys of conscious awakening, of transformation? What are some of the dangers that we might run into? The dangers of too violent fluctuations between land and water, or between the emotional response to life and the truth of life on the physical plane. So what we're talking about here, one of the dangers is that we have this emotional response to life and truth or life on the physical plane, right? So we're actually seeing things now that we may not on the physical plane that make us emotional, and we begin to maybe act in ways that are not congruent with the divine plan. Some aspirants are too emotional in their reactions, others too materialistic, right? One person may say, I'm just gonna, let go, let God. The other may say, I'm just going, I'm gonna go and store up a bunch of stuff, because I have scarcity mindset. Somewhere in between is this midway point that we're talking about. We can go one way or the other. The effect of this is felt in the midway spot and produces a violent instability. This instability has a direct effect on the solar plexus, right? We feel it in our gut. We get center, which was the midway spot in early Atlantean times, and is still the midway point in the transmutation process of the aspiring personality. So what we're saying is, again, as we talked about earlier, within even Steiner's work, within Casey's work, we had these different periods in time. We had a different consciousness. We had a different body. We actually absorbed and consumed and transmuted energies in different ways. During Atlantean times, which we are still to carry over from, we're still in this transmutation from the Atlantean times to the current age we're moving into. We are still part of that Atlantean body makeup or energy consumption makeup. And so it is still the midway point in this transmutation process of the aspiring personality. So for our personality that's aspiring to change, to move into this soul consciousness, we still carry with us this Atlantean body of the solar plexus. It transmutes and transmits the energy of the sacral center and of the center at the base of the spine, and is the clearinghouse of all energies focused in the centers below the diaphragm. We did a lot of discussion about these centers below the diaphragm in earlier videos. If anyone who hasn't seen those, you can go back and watch those. The dangers incident to a premature and uncontrolled pouring in of pure spiritual energy to the mechanism of the personality. That vital spiritual force enters through the cranial aperture and pours into the head centers. From them will flow the line of least resistance, which is determined by the daily trend of the aspirant's thought life. So as we think, this is the determination of how these energies will be consumed and transmuted in our bodies. This is why we get back to the ideas of right thinking and so on. If we're carrying concepts that may be detrimental in our thinking, as the spiritual light comes in, it will be determined by the daily trend. What are we watching every day? What are we thinking every day? How do we deal with our thought life? Because it's going to have a direct effect as the spiritual energy flows in. Another and rather potent danger is the result, literally, of the bringing together of the land and water. It demonstrates as the pouring into the brain consciousness, the land aspect of the knowledge of the astral plane. One of the first things an aspirant becomes aware of is a tendency to the lower psychism. It is a reaction from the solar plex center, but this midway point can be utilized as a jumping off place into the world of astral phenomena. This will produce death by drowning, for the aspirant spiritual life can be swamped and entirely submerged in the interest of the lower psychical experience. It is here that many worthy aspirants go astray. Temporarily, it may be, but the times are so critical that it is a matter to be deplored if any time is lost in futile experimentation and the retracting of any path chosen. So as we talked earlier, about the battleground of the astral plane, that was one of the topics of one of the laws. That within the astral plane, there are different levels. We talked about those different levels within the astral plane. So within the astral plane, you have degenerated spirits, right? And you have ascended spirits. And you can get involved in the demonology and the degeneration in the astral planes. You begin to play with black magic, or maybe even aspects of spiritism or other aspects that will take you and drown you spiritually in these lower astral planes. So that would be the drowning by the water, by the etheric or emotional body into this astral plane. A clue to the significance of these words is to be found in the recognition of the following occult fact. The place where water and land meet is the solar plexus center. The place where water, land, and air meet is the head. So if we just combine the two elements of water and land, which are the finite elements of earth, right? Water and land, that is in the solar plexus. When we incorporate the idea of the air, we now are in the head. Land is a symbol of the physical plane of life, just as we talked about in the tarot, right? The pinnacles. And one of the esoteric forms. Water is a symbol of the emotional nature, or the cups within the tarot. It is from the great center of the personality life, the solar plexus, that the life is usually ruled and government administered. So we talk about, last week we talked a little bit about government versus, different types of divine law and how do you administer government? Well, most government is administered, right, through this land and water. We've talked about that in sovereign discussions, right? The law of land and the law of the sea. But now we're moving into the age of Aquarius, which is the air. So now we're going to begin to be governed by the law of the air. And we're going to begin to move into these consciousnesses as we begin to combine these three together. When the center of direction lies below the diaphragm, there is no magic possible. The animal soul controls and the spiritual soul is perforce quiescent. Air is the symbol of the higher life in which the Christ principle dominates. We talked about the Christ principle, the Buddhic plane. Air is a symbol of the Buddhic plane, of the Buddhic consciousness, in which freedom is experienced and the soul comes to full expression. It is a symbol of the Buddhic plane, as water is of the emotional. When the life of the personality is carried up into heaven and the life of the soul comes down to earth, there is the place of meeting, and there the work of transcendental magic becomes possible. So again, we begin to look at these different concepts of the air, the water, and the land. And these are very correspondent also to the ages. We have like the age of land with the Romans and the different concepts. We have the Aries of Pisces, right? Which was kind of the fish and the church and different things. Even though Christ came in, he really wasn't manifest within our world. It was really the church and the concepts of the emotional body, the Piscean age. Now we're actually going to be moving into this age of the air, which the Bible talks about, that at this time we would be governed by the spirits of the air. And that's what's happening now, is that we're beginning to combine all these three together. And this, again, this is where the transcendental magic becomes possible. Any comments or questions on what we just read on this slide? All right, we'll move on to the next. Do you have a comment, Matthew?
No, sorry. No, it was just a thought that crossed my mind. I've been doing now in the mornings some mindfulness meditation and studying the practice of loving kindness. And I now see how this can actually hook in to get your mind in the right place, so that you don't make any mistakes or go overboard, like what is being suggested here as traps or dangers. So.
And thank you for that, because I find the same thing. If I spend some time in the morning to actually, look at my life, I think we've talked about this in some of the previous slides too, of not really what I want to manifest, but that I want to send out loving kindness. That's what I want to manifest, right? Nothing very specific, but just that I want to, manifest this loving kindness and be within divine purpose. But I do find my day is much different.
I can imagine.
This meeting place is the place of fire. You remember back to the beginning slide where we showed the man's head on fire. This is the place of fire, the plane of mind. This is the wands and the tarot. Fire is a symbol of the intellect, and all magical work is an intelligent process, carried out in the strength of the soul and by the use of the mind. So the soul is the strength and the mind is the guiding purpose. To make itself felt on the physical plane, a brain is required which is receptive to higher impulses and which can be impressed by the soul, utilizing the chitta, or mental substance, in order to create the needed thought forms, and so express the ideas and purpose of the intelligent, loving soul. So as we begin to talk about the loving soul, right, we're not manifesting through the heart. Right? We're manifesting through the brain, but bringing the heart in through the love. So we are now using love, but our minds are beginning to shape and form the thought form. These are recognized by the brain and are photographed upon the vital airs found in the brain cavity. When these vital airs can be sensed by the magician in meditation, and the thought forms imprinted on this miniature reflection on the astral light, then the real potency in magic can make itself felt. The brain has heard occultly the injunctions and instructions of the mind. Again, we're separating mind and brain here. The brain is the vehicle. So the brain's like the telephone, right? Your voice is the mind behind the telephone, right? The telephone's just the technology that's required to make this manifest. We have the mind and we have the brain. So the brain has heard this and occult and instructions of the mind as it relays the behest to the soul. So this is our connection between the mind, the brain, and the soul. The vital airs are swept into form-making activity, just as their higher correspondence, the modifications of the thinking principle, the mind stuff, as Patanjali calls it, are thrown into an analogous form-making activity. These then can be seen interiorly by the man who is seeking to perform the magical work, and much of his success is dependent upon his ability to register impressions exactly and to see with clarity the forms of the process in magic which he is seeking to demonstrate as magical work in the outer world. It might therefore be said that there are three stages in the form-making process. We're talking about these forms that we're making with the mind through love, right? First, the soul or spiritual man, centered in the soul, consciousness and functioning in the secret place of the Most High, right? Talking about the secret place of the Most High, visualizes the work to be done. This is not a sequential act, but the finished completed work of magic is visioned by a process that does not involve the time element. So this is outside of time, right? This does not involve the time element or spatial concepts at all. So we're outside time and we're outside space when we're doing this. Secondly, the mind responds to the soul, calling attention to the work to be performed, and is swept into thought form making activity by this impression. According to the lucidity and illumination of the mind stuff, so will be the response to the impression. So we're talking about the lucidity, right? Which is the sanity, which is the ideas of coherent thought, which is the right mindset that we talked about earlier. And also the intensity and the fire that we were talking about as the mind stuff. If the mind is a true reflector and receiver of soul impressions, the corresponding thought form will be true to its prototype. If it is not true, as is usually the case in the early stages of the work, so meaning that, you know, if you don't feel you're there yet, that's fine. That's in the early stages of the work. That's where you're supposed to be. Then the thought form created will be distorted and incorrect, unbalanced, and out of drawing. It is in meditation that the work of accurate reception and correct building is learnt. Hence, the emphasis laid in all true schools of esoteric training upon a focused mind, a capacity to visualize, an ability to build thought forms, and an accurate grasp of egoic intent. So, you know, what's my egoic intent? Is this for me? Is this for my desires? Is this for the divine purpose? So as we begin to meditate, we can actually begin to meditate on this egoic intent. Hence also the need of the magician beginning the practical work of magic with himself as the subject of the magical experiment. He begins to grasp the vision of the spiritual man as he is in essence. He realizes that virtues and reactions, which is at spiritual man, would evidence in physical plane life. He builds a thought form of himself as the ideal man, the true server, the perfect master. He gradually coordinates his forces so that power to be these things in external reality begins to take shape so that all men can see. And again, when we use the term men here, this was written at a time where that's where the energy, again, I think it's more about the energy when we use the term man and woman often, is that is the energy of this time. As Cosmic mentioned earlier, we're transitioning into the time of the female. And so as this pertains both to men and women, that the idea of the ideal woman, the perfect master, she gradually coordinates her forces so that power to these things and externally related begins to take shape so that all men and women can see. Any questions or comments before I move on to the next? Okay. So he gradually coordinates his forces so that the power to be these things in external reality begins to take shape so that all men can see. So as we begin to form this ideal concept of what that looks like to each of us, that ideal soul, essence, not the personality, that's being manifested in the reality. The soul self is coming into the physical body. The idea of personality is still there. We will still have our uniqueness, but it will not be based on personal desire, ego, things like that, that are just from the personality. So all men can see. He creates a pattern in his mind which hews as true as he can make it to the prototype, and which serves to model the lower man and force conformity to the ideal. So again, we're trying to take the lower man, right? Which we need. We need the concepts of self-preservation and things like that. We do need the lower man, but we begin to conform him with the ideas and concepts of this higher spiritual man, this ideal man that we have. As he perfects this technique, he finds a transmuting, transforming power at work upon the energies which constitute his lower nature, until all is subordinated and he becomes in practical manifestation what he esoterically and essentially. And this takes place, he begins to be interested in the magical work in which it is the function of all true souls to participate. So as we begin to grow, we are not perfect at first. It's not something that takes immediately. This is a process, a transformation that's not immediate. That as we begin to work on this each day, each time we do it, we may take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but we begin to manifest. We begin to see this ideal. Our ideal man may change as we begin to actually get into this practice. We may learn or begin to understand different occult realities that are going to change our ideal of the perfect man based on what the soul brings forth. Then the third aspect of the form-making process can manifest. The brain, this technology, this thing that we've created and manifest in the 3D, the brain is synchronized with the mind. So the brain and thinking and the mind are 2 different things, okay? The brain is synchronized with the mind and the mind with the soul. So we have the brain, the mind, and the soul. The mind being the intermediary between the physical technology of the brain and the divine inspiration. And the plan is sensed. The vital areas in the head can be modified and responded to the force of the building magical work. The thought form exists. Then as a result of the previous 2 activities, but it exists in the place of the brain activity, it becomes a focusing center for the soul and a point through which energy flow from the performance of the magical work. This magical work carried out under the direction of the soul, inspiring the mind, which in turn impresses the brain, leads then as a result of this triple coordinated activity. Triple, again, this is something Cosmic talked about, the 3, not just the 2. To the creation of a focusing center or form, which the head of the magician, within the head of the magician. The energy which flows through the focal points acts through 3 distributing agents, and hence all 3 are involved in the magical work. So we have the soul working through the mind, working through the brain, and the brain is going to work through these 3 agents, distributing agents. So we need the distributing agents for this energy that we've created from the soul to the mind through the brain. The first distributing agent is the right eye, okay? The right eye through which the vital energy of the spirit can express itself. Remember how some people say the eyes are the window to the soul? And that's because the eye is the distributing agent of the soul. The throat center through which the word, the second aspect of the soul, expresses itself. And the hands through which the creative energy of the third aspect works. So the idea that through our throat, through our word, we can actually express our soul also. Right? As Jesus said, it's not what goes into a mouth that makes anyone holy, it's what comes out. So as through our vocal cords, we can express our soul. And the hands, this is what Walter Russell talks about. He talked about how he would connect with this divine knowing, and that's how he could sculpt, right? So the hands were the vehicle of the expression of the divine purpose. The white magician works with his eyes open, the voice proclaiming and the hands conferring. So we don't close our eyes and go into trance, you know, we proclaim and we work with our hands. These points are of technical interest to the experienced worker in magic, but of symbolic interest only to the aspirants for whom these letters are intended. So for those who are, you know, these are of technical interest to the workers, the ones that are doing this, but for those of us who may not be doing this currently, you know, this is what we're aiming for. That the inner vision may be ours, the eyes see clearly to the glory of the Lord, and the voice speaks only in benediction, and the hands be used only in helpfulness, may well be the prayer of each of us. So that concludes Rule 8. And hopefully it was a good wrap up. I think we got a lot of good comments this. Any comments or questions on this last slide? Yeah, Matthew.
Sorry, I came in late, by the way. I made a mistake. When they speak about the right eye, is that meant as a capacity to see in a certain way, or is that capacity to visualize, or what does she means with the right eye, or is it physically your right eye? Or
yeah, it is physically your right eye. It could be, as Baer talks about, there's two polarities to our eyes, right? One is kind of transmitting, the other is receiving. So I think,
and it can be different based on hand dominance and things like that also, or is it always that eye?
Well, again, she hasn't gone into great detail here, right? So I would say that she's saying it's the right eye, and that could have to do with, the right side is your father's side, which is the male side, right? So I don't know, maybe it's because of that, that we're transmuting and we're receiving on the female side. That's just a guess on my part, but there's a lot to do with the sides of our body, regardless of our dominance as to male and female. I mean, Eileen McCusick gets into this very heavily when she talks about biotuning, that the right side is your father and the left side is your mother.
Okay, so it's a physical eye. Okay.
Again, I'm guessing that she doesn't go into explanation here even further into which. Any more questions? All right, so this wraps up Rule 8 for now. Again, we're at the midway point within Alice Bailey, which is the jumping off point. And so we are going to jump off of Alice Bailey for a little while. We're going to get into Robert Bartlett's work next week of the real alchemy, because everything that Alice is speaking here is actually covered in alchemical work, right? And as Robert Bartlett will explain, alchemy is just not a personality or psychic experience. It is actually a physical experience that the body can go through as we do alchemical work. Because within these scenarios, within this concept of Bailey, which is from the East, right? The body is an important transmutation device. It is a very important, this is what makes, it's just not all consciousness. How our body is, how our body responds. We have to take our body through a transmutational process to move on. It's just not the consciousness. So within the alchemical work that we're going to talk about next week, we're going to talk a bit about how alchemy affects the body and how it affects that transmutation process. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of alchemy. We're going to get into chapter 2 of Bartlett's work, where he actually talks about why and what alchemy is and what it does. It's going to be compared to chemistry, which we talked about a little bit previously, about chemistry being more of a Western concept, Western medicine, cult of death versus the cult of life. And then from there, after we get into alchemy and what's going on there, we're actually going to jump into discussions of biogeometry, which is a little bit different than Ibrahim's Karim. I mean, it's the same concept, but from a different perspective. We're actually going to talk about biogeometry of the bio part and the geometry part, about frequency, angle, and all those things and how they affect this alchemical process that we're all on at this point. Because that's really what the alchemist, that's really what the aspirant is. He's an aspiring alchemist in both body and soul. So that's what we're going to cover next week. Any comments before I sign off?
That's exciting. That's coming up. Woohoo!
Anybody else? Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River with the Walter Russell, Secret of Light Group. Always a pleasure. Thank you all for coming. You are always such a pleasure to see and discuss with. And thank you for all your opinions and comments and questions. We will be meeting next week doing Robert Bartlett's book, Real Alchemy, Chapter 2. And we will hopefully like and subscribe. Anybody who's watching, please like and subscribe. Also give your comments on what we've talked about. We always appreciate it. We always want to provide good and insightful content on this channel. So thank you so much, and we will see you next week.